Yes, we're going to have a little discussion. So if you've got questions, please feel free to come up to the mic. I guess just to start things off, I think common theme here is context. And what does that mean? I mean, I suppose if our focus is on the patients, what do the patients need to know? Is that the only focus? What is context to you? I guess we can start with Charles. Sure.
I think context to me is explaining what the relationship is and how much money was received for it. And I should have mentioned that one of the other things that we did is, as part of our search, if a payment was under $250, it doesn't automatically show up. You have to click another button in order to see those smaller payments. So from the perspective of somebody who received a meal, we tried, that's not something that automatically shows up.
Mary?
Well, I think context really is, and I think we've talked a bit about it here this morning, we have the relationship, we have that exchange of value, but what is the purpose of that relationship? So in some instances, it can be for educating the physician, or it can be a collaboration for research. So to me, that's the important part of the context as well, not just that there was an exchange of value, but what was the purpose of that.
I guess my point would be that some people would call educating the physicians the talks that the FDA considers promotional talks. And so, I think depending on your lens, context can mean different things. I think what we try to do is label it speaking and then give the company's definition. But it's clearly some things that people in this room at their academic institutions have banned their physicians from taking part in.
Right. I'm not sure that that's necessarily across the board a good thing. So I think or do we have another way? Again, as I described Dr. Waller, how do you get this information? And making sure that it's balanced. But I think just eliminating any educational program as being characterized as marketing is not a very balanced approach.
What about the some of the innovations that occur from collaborations? Is that information that's being is the public being educated on that as much as they are about sort of these headline items of docs that are sort of on the take or whatever the story is? Are we seeing as much of that part of the picture, and can that be can that be improved? Can that be linked perhaps to some of this?
I think if you look at the coverage of this past weekend's ASCO conference, the public is getting a lot of information about innovation and collaboration. In fact, I would argue that the amount of information they're getting about medical journal articles and presentations at conferences, far overwhelms the information about conflicts of interest. And what the press, I think, does a poor job of is following back up on when those studies actually and promises and cures don't come out, and what happened with those. So, I would say that the balance is tipped far in favor of stories about the fruits of the collaboration and not the conflicts.
Interesting. Mary, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I think, yes, people hear about research, but when we talk about this conflict of interest, when we talk about this exchange of value, I don't think that it's part of the conversation then. Why do you have these collaborations? So I think we need to do a better job of educating the public about, again, the purpose for some of these collaborations and what is fair compensation for the time spent doing that.
Thank you. From the audience?
Yeah, so I'm Paul Billings from Life Technologies. Charles, first of all, I want to say that I think your work in ProPublica is very important. On the other hand, I think we don't want to see character assassinations, witch hunts. We don't want to see the demonization of the role of money in research necessarily, because frankly it has to be paid for in one way or another, whether it's tax dollars or private enterprise or whatever. So in your presentation, the stories about Dr. Drought and Dr. Sachs lacked quite a bit of detail about why they were getting this money. What it was kind of a kind of gloss over, and could be, I think, viewed as rather confrontational to their characters, and maybe rightly so. But I think they deserve at least a little more airing of what the granularity of their stories are. And similarly, I pose as a question to you, what's the evidence that what you're doing is actually improving the system?
So a couple things. One is I agree with you about differentiating research payments. I think if you look at the stories we've done, we have not focused on the research payments at all, really. We haven't written about nor sort of referenced who's getting the most in terms of research payments or referenced it in any sort of a questionable way. I think that there is a key differentiation. I think everybody in the room would agree that research collaboration is vital to innovation. I think where it breaks down is on the issues of speaking and consulting, and that's what we've chosen to focus on as the areas where there is less sort of uniformity of perspective. You mentioned research, though. The two gentlemen who I showed, that this was not research. This was speaking and consulting, and we go out of our ways to reach these folks. I mean, calling them repeatedly, emailing them, sending them letters, asking the companies for detailed information about this. Nobody wants to talk about it. So when you say context has to be provided, takes two to provide that context. If the industry itself is not interested in discussing what these people are speaking about or letting us attend those presentations, sharing the slides, then the industry is, we're just going to decline to comment.
Okay, I guess I would say that those folks have, as Sharon pointed out, there's a kind of a reticence to tell people what your annual salary is. They have a right to privacy as well.
Next.
Guy Chisholm. This is mostly directed at Charlie. Myself and my institution are very strong advocates of transparency and disclosure. And I was thinking how what we really need is somebody to pick up the ball here, the IOM or the AAMC or some organization that could put the right parties in the room from the media, government, industry, academia, and really try to educate the public about which of these kinds of interactions are beneficial and which aren't. And I was really happy when ProPublica came out with the data they were accumulating. I had one of the people in my office. I'll start here. We're asked all the time, how do you know that your physicians and scientists are telling you the correct answer when you have them disclose? And we have a zero de minimis disclosure. Anything in the healthcare industry, you have to tell us. And I could never answer that question. And those 15 companies, and then we were having a lot of trouble for all the reasons that Charlie said, going through those data. And when ProPublica came out, it made it much easier. So when we see a discrepancy on one of these company or ProPublica's website, and what our physicians are telling us internally and what's on these websites, you get an email from me. And if the discrepancy is over a small amount, we ask them to, look into it and let us know if we can help them get in touch with the company if the company's wrong. So that's all taking place. So it's very beneficial to me. What didn't occur to me is that the media could actually help in educating the public. The media has been looking for egregious missteps by industry and academia and focusing on those for articles. And I get the point about selling newspapers. But the way ProPublica puts together information, you could actually be among the enlightened in trying to educate the public about some of these things. And I didn't see it because it was small print. Is one of the questions you're telling people to go ask your doctor is, are there any benefits to society from your interaction with industry? Or is some of this money coming from innovations or discoveries you made? And I think you and I might agree on which of these we think are appropriate for an academician and which are not. But you have an opportunity here to be granular. And I think that the name Dollars for Docs has a certain connotation to it. The $73,000 in very big print and the very small print saying some of this is research money down here that doesn't really go into the pocket of this guy. Maybe there could be a little less disingenuous way of portraying that. Maybe not in the articles that you get local papers to write, but on your website where you're really trying to get information to people that's beneficial. So I just throw that out as a comment.
One of the things that pharma has been critical of Dollars for Docs, and one of the things that we've said to them from the beginning is the industry has taken no steps to do a similar website. If they think the context isn't there, I don't see the industry putting together a similar website with the context. They make it hard to even find this information on their own websites, and they're not making it easy to search across time periods or across companies. And I think that's telling. I think it's telling. Do they want people to actually access this? And if they put this together in an easy to search way, we wouldn't have to do what we're doing. But the reality is the industry is not doing that.
Hi, my
Okay.
name is Gabriela Avezzari from Pharma. Down, all right. He was tall. So I'm a little confused about the role of ProPublica when it comes to disclosure, because I think you're starting explaining quite well the reason and how you collect all the data and how you're trying to kind of be neutral, right, to put the data out there. But then I think once you start putting checklists and pushing patient to ask certain question, I think you're creating a biased context. So you put that data, you create a kind of indirect context, and you're driving some certain conclusion, you're driving the reader to drive some conclusion. So I'm trying to understand what do you think is the role of that? Because I would feel that those kind of questions would be better kind of quote unquote push from professional society, like society that are specific to a disease, but not from media that is trying to connect dots that I don't think should be connected.
So we talk to ethicists across the country and coming up with our questions about, to try to generalize it across companies and across payments, which represent so many different drugs, so it's not even one particular drug category in terms of questions. And I think many of the questions are questions you'd ask even of somebody who didn't receive a payment. Are there non-drug alternatives I can try first? Are there less expensive generics I can be prescribed? I don't think those are biased questions. I think that those are legitimate questions, and particularly if your physician receives funds from a company and is prescribing one of their drugs, I think those are reasonable questions to ask. I don't view them as biased.
I disagree.
I was going to say, I think some of the questions, as you pointed out, are there alternatives to treatment, and is there a generic? Frankly, people are asking a lot of those questions already, and it might be through the type of health plan that they have. So those are what I would call sort of more generic type questions. I think the others do kind of indicate a little bit of a bias.
Hi, Joe Morgan. Couple of quick important distinctions that I just have gathered over today that I'd like to make. One is the difference, we're throwing around the words character a lot, and I want to just say that I think character is who we really are, and reputation, which I think is what we're really talking about, is who everyone else thinks we are. Everyone else from the external world can destroy our reputation, but character I don't think is the appropriate word because we can't really assess one's character completely, and so it's more reputation. The other important thing that I wanted to touch upon is the issue that we keep speaking about physicians, especially going forward with the Affordable Care Act, et cetera. There's going to be, I believe, increased privileging for mid-level providers, and quite frankly, if I was trying to push a product and I knew that one subgroup of people who could, prescribe this product, what have you, was much more regulated than the other product, of course I would go to the less regulated subsection of that population who's able to do so. So I think we need to include them. And then I guess a question, and it's kind of a proposal that, keeping in line with the title of this conference, which is facilitating innovation and maintaining integrity. I don't think it can be assured. Nothing's assured ever. But what I think is a reasonable framework is creating a single source and or a standard, not this journal has this standard for disclosure, this hospital has this standard for disclosure, and kind of, coming together with some sort of collaboration to come to what that standard is, and then making it as transparent as possible. And I think for all, not just physicians, but everyone who, you know, has the ability to have a conflict of interest or is susceptible to that. And I was just curious, between you two, how you felt about just that as a general framework, and any comments on that. Thank you.
Well, I think we did hear a theme this morning of sort of the need for more uniformity. So I think it's very difficult when you have, whether it's any time you're talking about standards, when you have several different entities that are all asking for information but in a different format, different time period, different purpose. You know, and I think we haven't talked much about how much time and how many resources go into doing all of this compliance and doing all of this reporting. And it strikes me, you know, every time we're spending time and resources on that means it's time and resources that are not spent on, you know, in a hospital, direct patient care, or doing research and other things. So I think we're hearing a bit of a cry for, if we're going to do this, number one, let's make sure it's meaningful information. I think that's really important, but also can we do it in a much more efficient way? So useful and efficient.
Yeah, I think that Mary's right. I mean, I think that was one of the reasons that the industry supported the Sunshine Act, was that different states were passing their own Sunshine Acts with different rules, and that the Sunshine Act will impose a nationwide standard. And I think the question is, will institutions and agencies follow suit and use the same standard as opposed to different standards? I mean, this is going to be the standard that industry is spending millions, if not billions of dollars adhering to, and it's the one that the law calls for. So it would seem like, rather than that everybody should move in that direction if that's the standard. I mean, I don't think you're going to change the Sunshine Act standard, because the law itself, not just the rules, is very prescriptive as far as that goes. As far as other practitioners, the Sunshine Act only calls for the disclosure of this information with respect to physicians, not other providers. And so it may be something you want to push Congress to expand the Sunshine Act to include other providers, so that that information on them is disclosed in the same manner and fashion as it is for companies. But I do think it's a challenge for the folks in this room, you know, to your point about what is sort of a meaningful interaction. If there's a consensus around what you want to go to the mat for, is it the research part of it that you want to sort of make the point to the public, that's the type of interaction that you are most concerned about? But to just say interactions, what do you include under that? And again, like I had said, I think different people in this room would say different things.
I would hope that we do have a chance to revisit the Sunshine Act, because one of my concerns is it's what I call legislating by anecdote. And I'm not sure how thoughtfully this was all constructed. Is this really the right approach? Is this the best way to do it, to provide, again, meaningful information to patients? So I hope that this will be a continuing process of making sure that this is appropriate. Is it doing what it was really intended to do? And that we should be revising it as we go along.
And I think, you know, another sort of point is that the Physicians Sunshine Act is only one piece of the conflict of interest landscape, and in a sense also it's because I think the reporting is somewhat time lagged. It's not going to have, you know, sort of real-time data that you might compare to some other, you know, conflict of interest outcome. So I think that's a real challenge, and how do we put these together? I think, you know, we heard earlier from Heather that you can come up with some scenarios that make it look like something's gone wrong when in fact everyone's doing their best. Next.
Lisa Klein, Inova Translational Medicine Institute. Mary, I actually have a question for you, because you talked about the reporting structure and when we're going to be hearing the reports from the Sunshine Act. What body is making the decisions as to what is going to go into that report? You mentioned that there did not seem to be context in it. Who's making that decision? How is the decision being made? It's wonderful if they legislated that it had to be done, but so frequently the processes to make them occur are not legislated along with it. Has that occurred?
Well, I think it's going to be part of the regulatory process, and I think that's what we're all trying to engage at this point, making sure that there is context. Maybe it's the preamble. I mean, what is this website actually going to look like? So that is sort of the ongoing discussion right now, and in my mind, it's a pretty short time frame. If, you know, I know it's a year away, but I think we have a lot of work to do before that website actually goes live. I mean,
so when you say regulatory, who is regulating this.
Right, so my understanding it's HHS that's issuing, CMS, I'm sorry. That will be
CMS
issuing
is-
the regulation, so that's who, you know, we'll have the back and forth with.
So CMS issued the final regulations which govern this. They haven't prescribed what text will appear on the website when it comes. I don't think that will probably come through regulation. I think that will probably be done administratively. One thing that the law calls for specifically is that the data be available in downloadable format. And so what I would expect, though, is that not just the CMS website, but that this will be pretty uniformly integrated into physician comparison websites, whether by Health Grades or Vitals or Rate My Doctor,
Leapfrog,
that this will migrate into all of those different sites beyond just the CMS site.
And that's why I think it's really important for us to have that dialogue with CMS, because as you said, this is going to be proliferating to a lot of other sites as well. And again, making sure, is this, number one, making sure it's accurate. Is there going to be a process for making sure that it is accurate? And, you know, if you find something that isn't, what's the protocol for responding to that? And then, you know, again, it's going to be an ongoing process. But as others are using this information, you know, is this useful information? And how can we get it into a better context?
Thank you.
Hi, Danny Carlat from Pew again. Still Danny Carlat from Pew. In terms of the context issue, I think I agree with both Charles and Mary that it's important. In fact, one of the things we're trying to do at Pew now is to put together a working group with 3 or 4 device companies and drug companies to come up with sort of a joint paper that we will be able to give to CMS in order to help them with their language. Having been a promotional speaker myself in a prior life, I have been disappointed, I have to say, with some of the language that I've seen on the pharmaceutical industry websites in terms of their descriptions, where again, the FDA, you know, essentially defines these talks as advertisements. The slides that promotional speakers use are dictated by the company. Sometimes the order of the slides are dictated by the company. So these are very much promotional programs, and yet we often see these kinds of the language in terms of educational programs or expert-led educational programs without the kind of context that I would like to see, which is, you know, a really full description of how it's regulated by the FDA, and as Charles said, maybe the slides, maybe some video of some of the actual talks so that the public can actually see what these talks look like and see if they think that they would be, you know, valuable talks for their doctor to be giving, if they would be proud of their doctor giving those kinds of talks. So context is great, but I'd like us to kind of move full steam ahead and doing a good job with it.
Any comments on that? No?
I think that different drug companies and different device companies also have different positions on various issues. I mean, some of them were signed on as supporters of the Sunshine Act, others did not. You see this playing out right now with respect to sharing of clinical trial data. You have some companies like GlaxoSmithKline that have been very aggressively out there and saying, we're going to share our clinical trial data, and you have others absolutely fighting tooth and nail against regulators on that. So companies are not sort of a uniform beast, and the view, both in this room and in the industry, is different as well as far as these things go. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that is a good description, that there is going to be a variation among different companies and a whole variety of topics. And as far as reviewing the slides, I mean, I'm sure the various companies, I know when I've made presentations, they have to make sure that they're compliant with FDA rules and regulations. So there are a lot of reasons for the company being involved with those presentations as well.
We have a question from the webcast from the University of Toronto. Thank you, Charles, for your great work. I routinely refer to ProPublica to verify the conflict of interest of authors of papers that appear to be more about marketing than research. While industry funding of research is not the same as, say, speaking fees, there is clear evidence that such funding biases research in multiple ways. Thus, while you may have footnotes pointing out funding that is research, do patients know that such funding can still constitute concerning biases?
I think that's really tricky, and it's not something that we have enough information to parse out now, so we don't really make an attempt at it. I think similarly, the area of consulting is such a broad phrase. Consulting can encompass everything from what should be in the drug advertising, that's consulting, marketing consulting, and consulting can also be working on, drug safety boards, and those both would be lumped in under consulting, but they're two totally different things, and so having a bit more granularity on these things would be very helpful.
Hi, Stephanie Nguyen from the Genetic Alliance. In light of what's been discussed earlier about the perceived conflict of interest despite the context of interest and how it's important to inform the public about the benefits that can be gained from beneficial collaborations between industry and researchers and physicians, do you think that only presenting one side from how just presenting the side of how much money the doctors are receiving from these pharmaceuticals is kind of building upon the stigma and suspicion that comes from what's already in place in terms of the suspicion that there's something harmful to come from the conflict of interest that's present right now? And the chilling effect that it might have on doctors considering a beneficial collaboration between the industry. Do you think that the patients asking these questions would further chill the doctors not wanting to get involved at all?
I would say if physicians are not willing to have a conversation with their patients about the money that they're receiving from industry, that says it all in itself. I mean, if you don't want to have that conversation, I don't know what to say, but I would find a new doctor.
I mean, it's not necessarily the conversation, but say a doctor is considering a collaboration and he has very many patients coming in asking him, what is he doing? Do you think it might chill the effect and make him say, like, oh, I just want to wash my hands of this at all? Or kind of informed, I guess what I'm trying to say is, based on the discussion earlier about informing the public and informing doctors about the benefits that can be gained from collaborating with industry, do you think that this has an even further chilling effect on the current public stigma that comes with a conflict of interest?
I would say no.
I think the concern is more with publishing this information on a website if you're just going to list names and dollars amounts. So I think Charlie's done a nice job of trying to provide some context to it. We could have a little debate about, is it the appropriate context, is the appropriate information? I thought Guy made some very relevant comments about the size of the text and where various things are noted, but at least there is some context. My concern is that there will be a chilling effect if we have the website from CMS go live in September 2014, and there's just a whole host of articles, newspaper articles, that just list the doctor's name and the amount of money. I think that's the chilling effect that a lot of people are concerned about.
This hasn't been said, but I've also heard stories of pharmaceutical companies who are actively using this data to push back against physicians who they term greedy, and that pharmaceutical companies now have the tools to check how much physicians are making from other companies and what they're being paid. And so I think the industry, which before only had access to its own information, now has access to an incredibly competitive body of information that will help them sort of better do their jobs. And so, while on the one hand, I think they push back on this, on the other hand, I assume that they have many statistical people poring over this and looking at their own speaker lists and other companies' speaker lists in their same sphere and using that for their business purposes. So, I mean, I think that's another use of this data as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Cashin from NIH. Some of this conversation reminds me of conversations we had 10 years ago when we were beginning to look at hospital outcomes and wanting to report that on websites, and particularly in relation to context. People were saying, well, this hospital is primarily a safety net hospital. If we report the outcomes are going to be worse. I I don't know where that conversation and dialogue and where they are right now. I tried to look up that information while we were talking, and it's not really clear on some of the websites. But my question is, are there some lessons learned about context that we could get from other organizations or other people who have tried to be more transparent?
Yeah, I think what you were hearing at that time from hospitals, and you hear it from physicians as well, is, to use that word, something more granular. What are the characteristics of this relationship? For them, what were the characteristics of this particular hospital, its patient population? So those are some, again, it is providing that context. What, other than just kind of this raw data approach, I think is really important.
I think what you still hear from hospitals is that they say that their patients are sicker, and that explains their numbers. But I don't need to tell this room that only 10% of hospitals have the 10% of sickest patients. Every hospital may think that they do, but they all can't. And so, people don't like the way statistics look, but that's more looking in the mirror than blaming the statistics.
Okay, it's time for us to end this session. I want to thank our speakers for an informative and very interesting topic with lots of interest and more to come, I'm sure. Thank you.